Previously, we saw Resident Evil Village dominate the rankings. So today, we take a look at Resident Evil 4 to see if that was a fluke or if Resident Evil keeps the streak alive. Let's find out if anyone played Resident Evil 4. Everyone, welcome. I am BD, and this is Did Anyone Play, a series where we investigate, analyze, and determine the truth about how much gamers have truly played a game like Resident Evil 4. How do we do this? We use trophy and achievement milestones within games, and then compare those results to an ever-growing database to evaluate and rank games compared to the rest of the industry. Using objective data and statistical comparisons, we can draw conclusions. We aren't reviewing the game in a traditional sense. Our goal is to provide analysis that can be better used to understand player behavior while ignoring game sales and hype to ensure we see reality as it truly is. Please drop a like or a sub to the channel if you want more of these types of videos. We're just starting out, so anything you can do is very much appreciated, and a quick spoiler warning as we may be talking about some elements of late game progression. So let's find out if anyone actually played Resident Evil 4 on Xbox, PS4, PS5, and Steam. Remember that all percentages we'll be talking about here come from the total number of players that have actually launched and or played the game, not just bought the game. So these results are a full reflection on how gamers played Resident Evil 4. The first milestone that players will likely reach is called My Preferred Piece. This milestone is achieved once a player upgrades a weapon. The first opportunity is starting in Chapter 2 when you first meet the merchant. So how many players made it to this very early milestone for Resident Evil 4? On Steam, 85.7% hit this. Xbox has 71.8%. PS4 saw 75.9% reach this, and PS5 has 78%. So because this milestone hits a bit later in the story than our usual milestones, there's a bit more loss than we see in games that have a prologue or tutorial. It's an average start, but nothing to be concerned about yet. Here's a quick look in graph form, and I put the database average up there. You can see that Steam is riding high at the start of RE4, and well above the industry average. PS5 is doing well, PS4 is just a sliver above the average, and Xbox is a few percent below the average, and we will see where this goes. So what is Resident Evil 4? It's a survival horror game that is a remake of the original RE4 released in 2005. The game follows Leon Kennedy, who has to save the president's daughter from a mysterious cult. You know, everyday problems. RE4 sports third-person shooting gameplay, occasional puzzles, and big set-piece moments. The estimated average time to complete the game with some side activities is around 21 hours. It was developed and published by Capcom. Resident Evil 4 released on PS4, PS5, Xbox, and Steam in March of 2023. The second milestone all players would likely reach is called Harpoon Hurler. This is awarded after a player defeats Delago, which is essentially the game's first boss and happens at the end of Chapter 3. Steam has 81.8% of players achieving this, Xbox is at 68%, PS4 is at 72.7%, and PS5 is 74.4%. This is a strong hold across all the platforms. Only 5% or less loss for RE4 from Milestone 1 to Milestone 2. That's an excellent result and puts all platforms well above the average at this point. This is starting to look like a possible repeat of Village. It's always good to understand the competition a game was up against when it was launched. What was happening around March 24th, 2023 in the gaming world? Well, titles like WWE 2K23, MLB The Show 23, and Fatal Frame Mask of the Lunar Eclipse came out around this time on these platforms. Looking at Google Trends here, we see that Resident Evil 4 in blue was dominating at the time of release, so it's clear that the hype was strong for RE4 and the competition was fairly low. We like to pick a mid-game marker for our third milestone. For Resident Evil 4, we chose Grilled Big Cheese. To reach this milestone, a player must defeat Mendez during Chapter 6. Mendez is essentially the third boss in the game. How many players are left at this point? RE4 on Steam has kept 76.9% of players. Xbox has 63.1%, PS4 is at 67.7%, and PS5 has 69.2%. This is another impressive hold across all platforms. Just around another 5% loss is all we see here, and continues the impressive retention we saw from the last milestone. How did Resident Evil 4 do with critics? Metacritic for PlayStation rates it at 93 out of 100, and Xbox received a 91 out of 100. On Steam, users have rated it overwhelmingly positive both recent and all-time, with over 86,000 reviews. RE4 was clearly critically acclaimed, and was nominated for Game of the Year in 2023. It's safe to say the reception for RE4 was very strong. The most important milestone is our fourth one. This is for completing the main objective and what we will ultimately base our final ranking on. It definitely shows how many players finished the game and truly played Resident Evil 4. This milestone is called Your Small Time. and is awarded when a player defeats Sadler at the end of Chapter 16. Where does RE4 end up on the different platforms? On Steam, 65.6% of players completed the game. For Xbox, it was 52.2%. PS4 had 56.3% finish, and PS5 had 58.3% complete the game. Let's pause here since we reached the end of the game. We want to check the percentage of players that quit each platform after making it through the first milestone but failing to reach game completion. Here our platforms are doing much better than the database average. While Steam performed best and Xbox worst, what you can see is that there is very little difference between platforms in reality. The player retention shown here is really impressive. Finally, to get a feel for how the completionists treated this game, the rare milestone 5 chosen for Resident Evil 4 is called Minimalist. This milestone can be achieved if the player completes the main story using only knives and handguns. This is most likely to be done on a run through New Game Plus. For Steam, we see that 7.8% of players actually accomplished this. On Xbox, it was 4.2% of players, PS4 had 6.5%, and PS5 had 6.4% that completed this milestone. Now let's see the full picture. Here are the raw milestones for our platforms for Resident Evil 4, and we've also added the database averages for each milestone in gray for comparison purposes. Let's get into it. Right off the bat, we should address how abnormal but awesome this data is. RE4 is showing incredible player retention throughout the game. We do see a dip for milestone 1, but remember the RE4 milestone 1 is a bit further into the game than most other games we analyze. But after that, we see a very shallow slope in our graph, and that is screaming that everyone keeps playing this game. They move through chapter by chapter with minimal loss in the overall gamer population. And take note of how high RE4 ends over the database average at milestone 4. It's very impressive. Overall, Steam was the strongest platform from start to finish, and Xbox was the weakest, with PlayStation 4 and 5 splitting the difference. But no platform was bad here. Everyone comes out looking good. So this is our final tally for our milestones. But now let's see how the game stacks up against all other games in our database and find out if anyone truly played Resident Evil 4. We use Milestone 4 as our ultimate ranking target. Here are the results for each platform for Milestone 4 once again. It's time to reveal the final rank Resident Evil 4 has in our database. Here we go. Perfect 10s across the board. Steam, PS4, PS5, and Xbox all hit 10 out of 10. Everyone played Resident Evil 4 on all platforms. What more can you say? Well, I've got a little bit more because if you remember, Resident Evil Village was our resident champion of the most played game ever. I said was because now we have a new champion. Resident Evil 4 on Steam is now the most played game we've ever analyzed. Huge congrats to Capcom are in order as Resident Evil 4 and Village are topping our charts. So those are the industry rankings for RE4, but our database is able to give us other comparisons as well. Let's break it down. So here we can show the breakdown for Resident Evil 4 across class, genre, review score, and game length. Please keep in mind that because we are comparing data across smaller subsets, the statistical power of these rankings are far weaker than our overall industry ranking. Starting off with class comparison, RE4 is a AAA game, so ranking it compared to all other AAA contemporaries, we see that perfect 10s remain all around. This isn't too surprising when you're on top of the charts already. How about genre? We have classified RE4 as a survival horror game. Compared to other survival horror games in the industry, we see it ranks 10 on Steam, 8 on PS4 and PS5, and 7 on Xbox. There's some strong competition here, but a lot of it actually comes from other Resident Evil games. Next is ranking based on reviews. The scores for RE4 put it in the category with games that have scored in the 90s for Metacritic. The review rankings compared to other similarly reviewed games have Steam and PS5 at 10, while Xbox and PS4 are at 9. Lastly is ranking based on average game completion length. RE4 is in the 11 to 25 hours range. Rankings compared to similar length games has Resident Evil 4 rank on Steam and both PlayStation platforms at a 10 and Xbox at a 9. There are no weak points in RE4's armor. So those are the rankings. But let's see if we can tease out some other observations by looking at these results in different ways. It's time for the deep dive. Let's start with progressive player loss. Each milestone shows how many total players have stopped playing the game at that particular point. This clearly shows Steam's strength all throughout the game at every milestone, but it also illustrates just how strong all platforms truly were because of how exceptional RE4 turned out as a game. Moving on, we can look at milestone player retention. This calculation only takes into account the player population loss as a percentage compared to the previous milestone. Milestone 1 is a bit of a larger drop in comparison to what comes next, but look at how impressive the hold on milestone 2 and 3 are. Even milestone 4 is strong, but you can really see how players stayed with this game throughout the entire story. How about completionists? How did the rarest milestone shake out on the different platforms? Steam is at 31%, while PS4 and PS5 take up 26% and 25% respectively. Xbox has a decent showing as well with nearly 17%. It's a fairly even balance across platforms. Finally, we check on early versus late game retention. When you read a chart like this, the best performers are further away from the center of the circle. Early game Steam was dominant, moving off my graph, but PlayStation is nearly there as well. But endgame loss, all platforms are now grouped up at the very edge. So there's very little loss in so many areas of the game, and this graph makes that very clear. Completionist loss still has Steam in the lead, but all platforms are still very close together. Let's take one final look at all the platforms and their Milestone 4 results, but this time we show the full percent rank within our database. This is to give you a detailed view of how the rankings played out. Use this data as you will. Let's wrap this up. So what are our major takeaways from all the data? The biggest takeaway is clearly the exceptional results we have for Resident Evil 4 across the board, getting perfect 10s no matter the platform and becoming the most played game we've ever seen when we look at the Steam version. It's no small feat, and one that we really wanted to investigate. Resident Evil Village now doesn't look unique, but a true and impressive trend where Resident Evil games know exactly how to grab and keep players engaged. In fact, when looking at the data, I can see no weak points or true drop moments. Gamers are clearly loving RE4. And not only do gamers love it, but it doesn't matter where you play it. Only 9% difference separates the best and the worst platforms at Milestone 4, and that's a mark of a truly universally loved game. The results speak for themselves no matter the platform. I really enjoyed looking at Resident Evil 4. I was certainly curious about how it would compare to Village, and it didn't disappoint. But why should we be surprised? Saving the president's daughter from a cult is always high up on the fun meter, and couple that with solid combat, interesting enemies, and a cast of memorable characters, and what's not to love? The recognition and reviews are all very well earned by RE4, and the gamers truly responded to it. The most meaningful act a gamer can perform is playing the game through and experiencing everything that the developers worked so hard to deliver. And in the case of Resident Evil 4, the developers most certainly delivered, and the gamers were rewarded and paid it back. Hopefully you found all this data interesting, and we learned a little bit more about our gaming world today, and RE4 in particular. And that's a wrap. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to do all the YouTube support stuff. Give us a like and a sub if you haven't already. I'd love to read any comments you have down below. What conclusions did you all take from this data? And of course, feel free to suggest the next game we should look at to determine if anyone played it. Until then, take care of yourself and each other.